1966 wasn't just another year of cinema. It was a global explosion of ambition, speed, paranoia, and political tension. Hollywood wasn't playing safe anymore. It was pushing cameras into war zones, racetracks, collapsing empires, and Cold War shadows. Every frame felt like it was chasing something bigger than story, chasing adrenaline, fear, and the illusion of control in a world changing too fast to understand. A roaring symphony of speed and obsession, Grand Prix throws you straight into the brutal world of Formula One racing where survival is measured in milliseconds. The film follows multiple drivers locked in a deadly season where ambition clashes with mechanical failure and human fragility. Every race feels like a war zone wrapped in polished steel and burning rubber. Director John Frankenheimer doesn't just film racing. He places you inside the cockpit, shaking with every turn, every near-death collision, every split-second decision that could end everything. The emotional weight behind the drivers is just as intense as the speed, revealing broken marriages, ego battles, and the crushing loneliness of champions. It's not just about winning, it's about surviving the cost of being the fastest man alive. The realism hits so hard, you can almost smell fuel and fear in every frame. This film turns Cold War paranoia into chaotic comedy wrapped in genuine human panic, where fear spreads faster than any real threat. When a Soviet submarine accidentally runs aground near a small New England island, the locals immediately assume invasion has begun. What follows is not a battle, but a spiral of confusion, misunderstanding, and escalating hysteria as ordinary people prepare for war against an enemy they've never actually seen. The island becomes a pressure cooker of rumors, patriotic panic, and clashing personalities, where logic slowly collapses under collective fear. As both sides scramble to avoid disaster, individual characters begin to realize how fragile peace really is when built on assumption instead of communication. Beneath the humor lies a sharp critique of Cold War mentality, showing how quickly ordinary communities can turn hostile when they believe they are under threat. It's tense, absurd, and deeply human at the same time. Alfred Hitchcock drags espionage into a colder, more grounded nightmare in Torn Curtain, where trust is a luxury no one can afford. A scientist's sudden defection to East Germany becomes a deadly game of deception, betrayal, and silent surveillance. Paul Newman's character pretends to defect, but every move he makes is watched, analyzed, and potentially fatal. Hitchcock strips away glamour, replacing it with gritty realism and suffocating tension. Even the smallest actions, boarding a bus, asking a question, walking through a crowd, feel like they could trigger disaster. The film thrives on paranoia, showing how intelligence work isn't about gadgets, but about psychological endurance under constant pressure. Every conversation hides a second meaning, every silence feels dangerous. As the mission deepens, escape becomes less of a plan and more of a desperate gamble against a system designed to erase you without a trace. Hawaii unfolds like a slow-burning colonial epic where faith, culture, and power collide on an isolated island that feels both paradise and prison. The story follows a missionary arriving in Hawaii with the goal of conversion, only to discover that belief systems cannot be forced without consequence. What begins as spiritual ambition slowly transforms into a generational clash between native identity and foreign ideology. The film expands across decades, showing how cultural imposition reshapes lives in ways no single person can control. Massive landscapes contrast with deeply intimate human struggles, where every decision carries moral weight that echoes far beyond its moment. The island itself becomes a silent witness to transformation, loss, and adaptation. There is beauty in the scenery, but beneath it lies tension that never fully disappears. It's a story where intention and impact are constantly at war, and no one escapes unchanged. The Sand Pebbles is a brutal meditation on duty and isolation, set aboard a U.S. gunboat patrolling revolutionary China. Steve McQueen delivers a quiet, intense performance as an engineer who slowly becomes entangled in a conflict he never truly understands. The ship itself feels like a floating prison, surrounded by political unrest, cultural friction, and rising violence on every shore. What starts as routine military presence quickly dissolves into chaos as tensions between foreign forces and local revolutionaries explode. The crew is trapped between orders and morality, forced to question whether they are maintaining peace or provoking destruction. The river becomes a symbolic boundary between control and collapse, where every mission carries the risk of escalation. As loyalties fracture and violence becomes unavoidable, survival depends less on strength and more on acceptance of a world spinning beyond comprehension. It's war, but slower, colder, and far more personal. Khartoum turns historical warfare into a sweeping clash of ideology, ego, and destiny set against the burning sands of Sudan. At its center is the confrontation between General Gordon and the Mahdi, two men convinced they are fighting for divine purpose, yet trapped inside a political storm they can no longer control. Charlton Heston plays Gordon with rigid moral conviction, while the Mahdi's rising movement spreads like wildfire, fueled by faith and resistance. The desert becomes more than a backdrop. It becomes a testing ground where empires collapse under their own arrogance. As negotiations fail and armies close in, the film shifts from diplomacy to inevitable catastrophe. Every strategic decision feels like it is being swallowed by history itself, where pride replaces logic and survival becomes secondary to legacy. The final siege transforms the narrative into a meditation on how civilizations misread each other until conflict becomes unavoidable and total. Is Paris burning? Reconstructs the tense final days of Nazi-occupied Paris with a chilling sense of scale and inevitability. As Allied forces advance, German commanders are ordered to destroy the city rather than surrender it, setting up a devastating countdown against history itself. Inside occupied Paris, resistance fighters operate in shadows, balancing hope with constant fear of betrayal. The film moves between political command rooms and street-level chaos, showing how decisions made far from the battlefield still determine who lives and who disappears. As tensions rise, the question is no longer whether Paris will be freed, but whether it will survive at all. The city becomes a symbol of cultural identity hanging by a thread, where every delay, miscommunication, and act of defiance reshapes the outcome. What emerges is a layered war narrative where victory and destruction exist dangerously close together, separated only by timing and fragile coordination. The Professionals is a sharp, sun-scorched action thriller where loyalty is constantly tested in the middle of a collapsing revolution. A wealthy rancher hires a team of specialists to rescue his kidnapped wife from a Mexican revolutionary leader, but the mission quickly becomes more complicated than money or orders. Each member of the team brings a different skill set and a different moral compass, creating tension even before the real danger begins. As they cross into hostile territory, the landscape turns into a battlefield of shifting allegiances, where today's ally can become tomorrow's target. The film thrives on contrast, disciplined tactical planning versus unpredictable human emotion. Explosions, ambushes, and betrayals unfold with precision, but the real conflict lies in what each man is willing to sacrifice for the mission. What starts as a rescue operation slowly transforms into a question of honor, greed, and survival in a world where nothing stays clean for long. Nevada Smith is a raw revenge-driven Western that strips its hero down to obsession and pain. Steve McQueen plays a young man who witnesses the brutal murder of his parents and embarks on a relentless journey to track down the killers. But this isn't a clean path of justice. It's a slow transformation shaped by violence, deception, and survival training learned from the very criminals he hunts. Each encounter forces him to evolve, not just as a fighter, but as someone slowly losing the innocence he set out to protect. The desert becomes a harsh classroom where morality erodes under heat and bloodshed. What makes the journey gripping is how personal it feels. Every confrontation is charged with memory, anger, and unresolved grief. As he closes in on his targets, the line between justice and becoming what he hates begins to blur in ways he can no longer ignore. The Appaloosa is a gritty Western about pride, ownership, and the quiet brutality of the frontier where reputation means survival. Marlon Brando plays a horse trader whose prized Appaloosa stallion is stolen by a ruthless Mexican bandit, setting off a personal mission that quickly spirals beyond simple recovery. What begins as a pursuit of property becomes an obsession rooted in humiliation, ego, and the need to reclaim control in a lawless land. The journey forces him into hostile territory where every town feels like a trap and every negotiation hides potential violence. The desert is not romantic here. It is dry, indifferent, and unforgiving, stripping men down to instinct. Along the way, alliances shift unpredictably, and trust becomes a liability. As the chase tightens, the film reveals that the real battle is not for the horse, but for identity and dignity in a world that respects neither. Every confrontation pushes him closer to losing the very thing he is trying to prove he still has. In the end, these films don't just show 1966, they expose a cinema world learning how to turn fear, ambition, and chaos into unforgettable storytelling.